Turn your living room into a joyful, hands-free playroom with CoComelon Sing and Play with JJ. Your child sings, moves, and learns right alongside JJ and friends, all on the big screen. It's designed thoughtfully to spark speech, rhythm, and coordination through songs and active play. Try an ad-free, safe, and interactive way to make screen time part of their learning and growth. Parents love how easy it is, voice-controlled and frustration-free. Kids love every moment of singing, laughing, and playing along. It's fun for them, and it's feel-good for you. Available now in the Volley app on your smart TV. Just search Volley in your TV's app store and start your free trial of CoComelon Sing and Play with JJ today. That's CoComelon Sing and Play with JJ. Available now in the Volley app on your smart TV. Search Volley and start your free trial today.
Volley. Welcome to Homeschooling Outside the Box, the podcast that encourages and equips moms who homeschool an outside-the-box child. Hey there, I'm Cindy Renna, and today I am talking with Nathan Clarkson. Nathan is an actor, author, filmmaker, and he is currently living between New York City and LA, but he loves to go home to Colorado to visit his family, who some of you may have heard of, with the last name Clarkson. That's a pretty big name in the homeschool world. This is indeed the son of Clay and Sally Clarkson. Would you like to say hello to us, Nathan?
Hey, how's it going, everybody? It's great to be here.
Awesome. Well, Nathan, thank you so much for talking with me today. I am thrilled to share the news of your new picture book with my audience, and we're definitely going to talk a lot about that. I know a lot of listeners have read the book Different and loved it, and we're going to touch on that as well. But before we do, just in case there are people who don't know a lot about you, can you just give me kind of a quick background on yourself, including a little bit about your homeschool journey, and maybe talk to us about how that might have been different, because you're kind of an outside the box kind of guy. You were an outside the box kid.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, as you mentioned, I'm the son of Clay and Sally Clarkson, and I consider myself very blessed to be so. I did grow up in a homeschooling family, and I'm really glad I was. I was such an outside the box kid in so many ways. I was dealing with, from a young age, with mental illness and some learning disabilities like dyslexia and ADHD. And but I was creative and outside the box. My personality and loud and talkative, and all these things are great things that God can really use. And sometimes, though, the modern world inside of a modern classroom can try to find ways to stifle those, because it's hard to deal with so many kids at one time. But my mom saw that each of her kids were unique and had different strengths, and she saw that my unique giftings and struggles and personality would best be served with really intentional focus. And that's why I loved being homeschooled, because it gave me the space and the time and the attention to really work through and be celebrated for my differences, rather than try to hide them in often what is such a peer pressured and kind of formulaic world. So yeah, that's kind of the basis of where I began learning and my homeschool journey. We grew up kind of all over the place. We moved from city to city as my parents kind of began writing books about education and motherhood and family and speaking. So I was lucky enough to kind of see the world and watch them live the calling that God had on their lives. And so that kind of put in my mind that God had a calling on my life. And with my mom and my dad, they were very intentional about telling us that all these unique things about us, even sometimes the hard things of, like the learning disabilities and the mental illness and the out of the box personality, that God would use each of those in my life. So watching my parents live into their calling that God had on them, and watching them touch lives and live a meaningful story, it gave me vision for thinking that maybe God could use me and all my unique things in a way that I could tell a great story. Maybe I was created with all my unique differences to tell a story. And since the time I was young, I love stories. I love writing. I love to use my imagination. And so it was only natural that in my adult life, I began transitioning into a life that was acting. I loved playing pretend as a kid, so I wanted to continue playing as an adult. And so I started acting. And I was able to go to school for acting in New York, and I was able to work in Los Angeles, and I still am in both places now. And then eventually that turned into filmmaking, and eventually turned back kind of full circle to what my family does, into writing and telling my own stories and telling stories through the word. And so kind of all these things are woven together, and I see how early on my homeschooling journey really prepared me for the life I'm living now, in that I was allowed to explore, and I was allowed to have this focus and intentional guidance from my parents, telling me that all these unique things were purposeful, and that God would use them. And so today I get to live my dream as an actor and an author and a writer, and that's kind of where this book came from, kind of out of my story. So that's in a nutshell, that is me and my origin story.
Well, that is wonderful. Thank you. And we're all so happy that you have transitioned and kept playing pretend, because I know you've got some great movies out there and this book is wonderful. And so you're definitely, like you said, stepping into your purpose. And that's one of the things I really love about your story, which I know some of from reading the book Different, is that I got the feeling that your family really kind of pressed into the differences instead
Mm,
of pushing away from or isolating. And nowadays, I think it's kind of hard um, for us to think back to what it was like. You know, I grew up in the 80s. I know you're a little younger than me, but it wasn't nearly, you didn't hear about things like ADHD and autism or bipolar or dyslexia. You just didn't hear about it as
mm,
much. So nowadays, it's almost like we have a little more license to be more accepting of it. It's more heard of, it's more common. But even back then, it was just, I love that it was sort of just embraced as part of who God made you to be and part of who you were. And
absolutely.
and I think sometimes there's still, even though it's well known, there's still a big stigma with parents. You know, it's hard. It is a hard thing
Mm,
to press into that, because your first knee jerk, I think, is to resist it and think, oh, we'll get through this, or oh, it's not that big of a deal, or and just kind of press on and it'll go away and move forward, can be the temptation. But why do you think it's helpful as an outside the box, man and former outside the box child? Why do you think it's helpful for parents to identify their kids' outside the box qualities and unique challenges, even not so much from a label perspective or a diagnosis perspective, but just to
sure.
really embrace and press into those differences instead of fight against them?
Absolutely. Well, I think it's kind of a really necessary thing. My mom often talks about how, before she had kids, she had this vision in her mind what her kids would be, and then she had kids, and we were totally different than what
Yeah,
she envisioned. And I haven't had any of my
that
own kids,
happens a
but
lot.
I was wondering if that was the case, because I'm feeling like I've heard that a lot. And
Hmm.
if we look through Scripture, we see that God intentionally creates each one of us. That each one of us are fearfully and wonderfully made. That He knows the hairs on our head, meaning that every child He gives us is unique, and every child has their own story, their own calling, and their own giftings and their own hardships. And so I think in a world now that often wants to quantify and often wants things to fit into a nice formula or kind of a cookie cutter mold because it's easier that way, it can be a
Hmm.
temptation to want to quantify and our kids to fit into something. And I felt that pressure in a lot of different ways, whether it's from classes or just the world or whatever it was. I felt that pressure even as a kid to fit in,
Hmm.
to be quote unquote normal. But I don't think that's how God has asked us to be. I think God asks us to grow and be uh, turn our faces and our minds towards Him. But I do think that He says, "I've made you uniquely for a story," and so I think it's really helpful for parents to identify these differences in their kids. One, so I think you can help them through the hardships that those differences will bring. My particular ones had their own set of hardships, and because my mom was keen to knowing those and seeing those, she could help me through. She knew that I love to be around people, that I love to connect, and that she knew that a lot of times. Um, that I needed to get my energy out. So it's in being a student of her child, she was able to help me through some of the harder bits of my differences, whatever those might be. And then two, I think it's a really great thing to identify your kid's unique attributes, because I think it can also you can help give your kids vision for how God can use those. Like I said, I was an out of the box kid with my personality. I love talking, I love connecting, I love pretending. And so my mom from a very early age said, oh, I see what Nathan loves. I'm going to introduce him to amazing stories. I'm going to encourage him to play pretend every day and to imagine himself a part of these. So I think in acknowledging and recognizing your kids' differences, it helps them, one, step through the hardships of those in their world with somebody and with more understanding. And two, it gives them vision for how God might use those differences and uniquenesses in their lives.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. And I love that phrase, student of your child. That's so, especially in the homeschool world, you think, well, I'm the teacher, but any good teacher knows you can learn so much from being the student. And so if you decide to take on that role and say, okay, I'm going to learn from my child, because you're right, like children are given to us already, like they're already born persons. That's Charlotte Mason's first principle. They're already there. They're not a blank slate that we can just figure out how we're going to program them, or a computer that we can program the way we want. And so we sort of already get the package. So I know personally for me, I see a lot of benefits to, like you said, being the student of your child, and working with your child's differences instead of against, specifically in your homeschool. And that, I know for a long time with us, that was a real tension, because I sort of had my own agenda, and I know we're going to do things this way. And this is, first we're going to do this. And I can be very academic and very, to-do list and checklist. And I think God has really given me the children he gave me to help me even grow in that. Because when you have twins on the autism spectrum, and then a son with ADHD and dyslexia, and, a daughter who's just super social, I mean, they just all need all very different things. And so kind of the common denominator between all of it, and really one of the biggest reasons we chose to homeschool, is relationships. And I found that we were doing one type of therapy at one time in the beginning with our twins who were on the spectrum. And it really just kept separating us. It was just pushing a wedge. And I got to a point where I thought, I need to let go of anything that is not helping me to grow in relationship with my child. Because you look at the gospel and it's like, that's how it transfers, So how am I going to be effective, and how are they going to come to me and have this relationship if that's not the focus? And I'll hear a lot of moms say, oh, I could never homeschool. That's too hard. I couldn't be with my kids all day, or I couldn't give them what they needed, if their reading is challenged, or, whatever their challenge is, they feel like they couldn't meet their needs. And I know that's, not a judgment on my part. I know that's a difficult thing, and homeschool might not be right for everybody. But to say that you can't do it, I think, is really ignoring that innate connection that God gives us with our children, where relationship is the pathway to getting to know them and to helping them.
Absolutely.
So I just think the benefits of working with them, you probably had a very good homeschool experience because your parents were kind of working in the flow of the river. They weren't going against the grain the whole time. So what are some ways that they did that?
Absolutely. Well, it's interesting. At first, I have to give credit to my mom for being a student of her children, because that is totally hers. Copyright Sally Clarkson. But I love that, because it made me realize that she studied me growing up, and that goes right into the benefits of working with your children's differences within homeschooling. And I think one thing that needs to be said is, my differences are very loud and obvious. They're diagnosable by professionals. You can see them. You could have seen them with me as a kid. I was climbing on trees. I was yelling, pretending I was a handful. So it's easy to point to me and say, that kid is different. Right. He doesn't fit in. But as my mom and I have looked back as we were writing the book, what we realized is every kid is different. Every child is unique. my brother, my sisters, me, were all created uniquely and for a purpose, like I mentioned earlier. So I think the benefit of working with your children's differences within homeschooling is you can take their unique makeup, their unique design, and you can tailor education to the way they were created to learn. You can tailor in a relational way. I mean, you see Jesus doing this with the disciples. He talks to each of them differently because he knows they're each different. And at the core of it, like you said, he was a relational being. That's how he shared his truth. That's how he educated them. That's how he ended up helping them to change the world because of a relationship he established with them early on. And so I think in recognizing that your kids are different, and each one is unique, that every kid is different, you can start to say, how is my child different in a way, and how can I help them learn in the way they were meant to? I've listened to so many lectures and read so many articles on education, how kids were each made to learn differently. And I'm sure as a mom, and so many moms listening, you know that there are some things that work for some kids that don't for others. I was an auditory listener. What I needed to do to ingest information was have things read to me, because when I read, my mind would mix up all the words and I couldn't keep them, and I couldn't follow the flow. So my mom would sit down and say, Nathan, you draw a picture of the story I'm reading to you. And I was able to ingest history. I was able to ingest science, whatever it was, because she said, this is how Nathan is going to learn. Now, the other kids learn differently. And so she tailored their education to them. But I think the beautiful thing about homeschooling, especially with a different kid, is you are able to spend that time in the focus. And I know it can be really hard. I can't imagine. I'm sure when it's my turn around with kids, it'll be a whole, I'll have a maybe different perspective. But the one I was given was I was able to have parents that saw me as unique and uniquely created. And so they said, well, if we're going to teach him and show him the calling and the story that God might have in his life, we have to tailor our education in our homeschooling to how he was created to learn. And I think that's been such a helpful thing for me, because I hear about so many kids with, the issues like I have, the differences like I have. And I hear about so many of them getting lost in classrooms, being overlooked, or feeling like they're bad or dumb or not good enough, simply because so often this world wants us to look the same as something else when God has created us to be unique and different. And I feel like that can be more explored and more celebrated sometimes within the homeschool environment.
Right, absolutely. We are so blessed. We have such freedom, because if you're in school, it's like this kind of smart is the smart that we want. And there's not much room for you to prove that you're smart in other ways, because that doesn't fit into the schedule. So yeah,
absolutely.
Kind of giving that freedom. And I have one who's very, very creative. And and he would just as soon go build a Lego monument about something we've learned. He was like
that was
8. Me. Yeah, he was 7 or 8 years old, and we were reading about Egypt. And he comes to me later that night. He had built the Sphinx out of Legos, just cause he wanted to,
That's
and I
amazing.
thought, that is incredible. Like, that would have been, I don't know, you miss those moments, I think, when you're too concerned with following this agenda and not being, whatever this agenda is for you, instead of being more in tune with the Holy Spirit. Like, how can I get this idea to that child?
Absolutely. Because relationships and kids aren't formulas. They're, they're unique humans to be related to, like you mentioned earlier. That's great. I love that. I'd love to see Lego creations, because I had an entire Lego city in my room. You couldn't get to my bed without tiptoeing, because I had streets and castles, because I've been learning about knights in medieval times. And so I have many fond memories with Legos.
We've got 3 boys, and every birthday and Christmas since they were 3. So we finally just converted the dining room it's a Lego room. That's what it is.
Amazing.
So, okay, well, let's talk about the book, because I'm so excited about this. Only You Can Be You. So it's a picture book, I know, which are sometimes geared towards younger kids. I personally am a big advocate of reading picture books and reading aloud stories to all ages. So I'll say it's for everybody. But tell us a little bit about it, like how it came about, and maybe tie in. I know it was sort of a spin-off of the book Different.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so maybe tell us how it came about.
Absolutely. Well, it kind of came about because a while ago, it started with our first book, Different. My mom and I wrote it together. And Different, the subtitle is the story of an out-of-the-box kid and the mom who loves him. And I came to my mom and I said, Mom, I think God's put in my heart that we need to write our story about what it was like for me to grow up as a different kid and what came along with that and the feelings and the hopes and the hardships I dealt with. And from your perspective as a mom, what it was like to raise and love a kid like that. And so we wrote this book called Different.
And let me just
And
interrupt you for a second and just
yeah.
personally thank you. I'm so glad you guys wrote that book. And on behalf of so many other moms that I've talked to, it was just such an eye opener. It was just a wonderful, like, it wasn't telling you what to do. There was no formula. There's no like, follow these steps and you'll figure it out. It was just, this is how it was. And it was
uh,
like a big hug.
I'm so
It
glad I
was
connected to you. That means a lot.
so great. But anyway, go on. So you guys wrote this great book.
Yeah, and like you said, it for some reason it connected with a good amount of people who felt that they were different or that their kids were different and they'd had similar stories to ours, and we were so happy that our stories connected with theirs, because I think there is strength in knowing that there's other people out there like you. And there's other people experiencing the things you have and are. And so we were so happy to receive a lot of messages and letters from people who say, oh, your story's a lot like mine. But there's one common theme we receive in a lot of the letters is, this book was for parents to read very often, so they could gain insight into their children. But they said, would you ever consider doing a children's book with the themes of this so they can start learning from a young age the things that you learned along your way? And so my mom and I started talking, and I had written a poem kind of during the process of writing Different that I would have wanted to read to little Nathan. And my mom helped me kind of shape it and add some more things in. And we eventually decided to make this a children's book that parents could read to their children to begin early on establishing that their differences and their uniquenesses are beautiful and they're good and they're God-given for a purpose. And so we want to do this in an effort to help kids accept and love the differences they have and see them as purposeful and useful, as well as love to see differences in others, be more accepting of how their brothers and sisters were made and the call that God has on their lives. Because we think this message of God making us uniquely and specially for a purpose is really important. So in this book, Only You Can Be You, with these beautiful drawings from this English illustrator named Tim Warnstees, and he created beautiful illustrations with animals and children, and all very unique. And so kind of any kid who reads it can point and say, that's me, because I love doing that in kids' books growing up. But we wrote it because we wanted kids from an early age to say, oh, I'm different. I think I'm unique. And instead of feeling lonely or bad or ostracized or whatever it is, we wanted kids to say, I'm unique, and that's a good thing. And God, the maker of everything, made it that way. One of the lines is, we're all different, and that's okay because the maker of everything made it that way. And it goes through all the different strengths that differences carry. And we think that's a message that's important for parents to be helping their kids understand from a really early age.
That's great. Well, I just know it's going to encourage a lot of kids, just like the book
Different,
encourage so many moms. I do have a challenge for you because it being a picture book, it's, kind of geared towards the younger audience. What would your message be? Let's say there's a tween boy or teenager whose mom is listening to this right now and is thinking, oh my goodness, this is my son reincarnate. Because that's really how I felt when I was reading Different. There were points where I'm laughing out loud. I'm like, that is Owen. And I actually had him listen to a podcast you had done with the HSLDA. I'll link to this in the show notes.
Absolutely.
And we were going through such a rough patch, and I just thought, oh my goodness, I just don't know. It just, sometimes you just get so in the weeds, you don't know how to understand or how to move forward. And I listened to that podcast and was so encouraged. And I finally called Owen. I said, hey bud, I want you to listen to this. This guy kind of has some things in common with you. And I had no idea how what he was like 9 or 10 at the time. And, he came out and he's like, that was really good. He reminds me of myself. And I like that. Because you're right. The moms can sort of focus on, this is so hard for me, but what we skip over, it's no picnic for them. They're struggling with some things too. Yeah. And, one of my favorite, and this is maybe more specific to autism, but I think it applies across the board. I had talked to somebody, the executive director of the therapy that we do, and she said, some people will say things, especially the higher functioning, like Asperger's and things like that, like, oh, they're just trying to be difficult. They're just trying to get attention, or and she goes, and I want to say, don't you think if they could find an easier way to navigate their world, that they would do it? I mean,
Yes.
why wouldn't they do it? So I think it's so crucial for us to kind of pause in those hard moments and flip that scene and think, gosh, what is this like for my son or my
Mm.
daughter right now? And just try to see it through their eyes. But if all that being said, let's say there's a mom who's really connected and she wants to do that same thing and say, hey, come listen to just this one part, just to put you on the
Absolutely.
spot here, Nathan. What is your message to those boys?
Yeah, thinking back to that time, to that tween time, to the early teens, it was really tough, and it's so kind of you to see it through our lens and say, "Oh, it is tough on them too." And I know I was a handful for my family and my parents and any of the teachers and co-ops I had, um, but it wasn't because I was bad, and I was so glad that I had people in my life who knew I wasn't just trying to be difficult, that there were things going inside of me that I couldn't explain, that I couldn't quite understand, and it was frustrating, and oftentimes it made me feel alone. And at that time, I really began to see my differences underlined. I began to see all the deficits I had and the ways that other people could do things that I couldn't, or the ways that other people could behave that I just couldn't quite get, the ways that other people could sit still or not talk back that I couldn't wrap my head around, or I just couldn't make myself do. And so this young kid, this boy who loved connecting and living life outside the box, began to feel very alone and began to feel very separated. And for someone who loves community and connection, which we all do, truly,
Mm-hmm.
it was a really hard time. And I was lucky that I had people who stepped into my world and walked that with me. But I would say to the boys out there who are in that place, that one, you're not alone. Two, it will get better. Three, that every difference you feel and every thing that might make you feel insecure or less than or alone, God's going to use that difference in your life if you let Him. If you make the choice to turn your mind and your eyes towards Him, He can use that in your story. So many of the things that I struggled with at that time, I now see is what God wanted to use in my life, whether it's acting or writing or being bigger than life. He uses the things that sometimes are hard in that time for His glory. God doesn't waste any part of us, and if we allow Him, He'll use all of it. So know you're not alone. Know that God has a plan for you, and that it will get better if we allow and make the choice to turn our eyes towards God and let Him write the story. Anybody in that space, you have a great story ahead of you, and God is going to use you not in spite of your differences, but because of them. So that's what I would say to anybody in that place currently.
That's amazing. Thank you. I'm sure that will be a message that needs to be heard and will be appreciated.
I'm
What
glad.
about what about a quick note for the moms in the trenches from a you're kind of on the other
Absolutely.
side. You're like, it's gonna be okay. It works
Totally.
out.
Totally. Well, I haven't had any kids yet, and I'm kind of excited to see what God gives me one of these days, because I'm sure it's going to be a for all the for all the trouble I caused my family. I can't wait to see how I get paid back, but I'm excited to walk in knowing that God creates kids uniquely. But what I would say to the moms, and this is really more just from observation of my mom, is hang in there. Know that we know you're not perfect, that no one's perfect. God loves us, not because we're perfect, but because we turn our hearts towards Him. So, the journey, I'm sure, is really frustrating. I can only imagine what it would be like raising me. But know that we really look up to you, that we really value your opinion. Know that the words you say to us echo into the rest of our lives. I still hear my mom's voice in my head, the words that she said, and that can be, if we utilize it, if you moms utilize it, can be a really powerful thing. I still wake up and hear that voice. Nathan, you were made for a purpose. Nathan, you are
Mm.
strong. Nathan, you have the ability to change the world if you follow God. I still hear my mom's voice in my head. So know that even though I'm sure it can feel monotonous and frustrating, that you choosing to engage with us will make all the difference. That you choosing to love us and to remind us of truth and to stick with us even in the hard times will be life-changing and possibly world-changing in the stories that God will tell through these lives.
That is awesome. And what I know personally, you don't always get immediate gratification with kids in general,
Totally.
but certainly
That took a while.
outside the box kids really takes an investment some days. And you're thinking, man, I don't know. I mean, there were like 5 years where I thought, and that this is, I did not say this, but I think this is how many of us feel some days. A friend of
Sure.
mine who has an outside the box situation, she was like, I don't know. He's either going to be a missionary or go to prison. We're not sure yet.
I've literally heard those words in my life. So
Depending on the day.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's very hard. But I want to add something to the moms too, just to find the joy, because I think that is what gets you, on those days where you're like, could be a missionary. Those are the great days. Could be a criminal. Not sure yet. Those are the days where you're like, okay, the same kid that you're thinking, how in the world is this child going to function in society, is the same one who builds the great Lego creations and comes up and tells you you look pretty and kisses you. Don't really try to see them as their whole person instead of the good days and the bad days, and just see them as the person that God created and who they're growing to be, and find the joy, and again, focus on relationships and coming alongside them to grow them in that. I love how your parents spoke into your future, and made you think those thoughts. What kind of man am I going to be? What could I do? Could I be like this or what?
Absolutely.
It just having that conversation, getting those wheels turning, I'm sure, like you've shared, had a critical role in who you grew up to be. So trying to keep the big picture in
Absolutely.
mind, I guess.
Absolutely.
Well, all right, Nathan, can you tell us any projects that you're working on right now?
I can. Well, I'm working on a few things. Like, part of my personality, being an outside the box kid, is I don't idle well. I heard someone say that once in an interview, and it just connected with me.
Yeah.
I don't sit still well. So I like to work on a lot of things pretty much all of the time, and I can wear myself out and I need a nap. But I've been doing a lot, which is so much fun. Obviously, you know about the picture book coming up in just about a week, which is so exciting. It's my first children's book, and I actually have another children's book in the line. I can't share too much, but it's with my sister Joy that we wrote together, which we're super excited. That'll be out, and we'll announce it here in a little while. And then I have my first solo book coming out in May, and it's called Good Man, and it goes through kind of the principles of what is a good man, what is a man, in a culture that doesn't know or has forgotten or maybe doesn't care. I wanted to look into scripture and to see what are the aspects that create a good man, because it's something that was always important to me since I was a young man. And so I'm excited to release that in May, and then I'm shooting a Christmas movie in January. So I'm kind of all over the place, but those are a lot of fun things I'm up to.
That is so great. I had heard about the book, about what makes a good man. I just think that is such a good, I'm so glad you're writing a book about that. That's wonderful. Okay. And how can listeners find you online?
Absolutely. Well, you can find me on Facebook, Instagram. I'm terrible at posting regularly, but please do stop by and leave a comment on something every now and again. It's fun. You can also find me at nathanclarkson.me.
Awesome. Nathan, thank you so much for coming on today and encouraging the listeners, and for speaking directly to these kids who I know you are just going to influence and encourage with all these things that you're working on.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It was a real honor.
Thanks so much for listening to Homeschooling Outside the Box. If you are loving the show, please head over to iTunes and leave a review. This is a great way to help other moms just like you find encouragement in their homeschool with their outside-the-box child as well. For more encouragement, be sure to head to cindyrenna.com, and you can check out some great blog posts as well as a shop that will help equip you on your homeschooling journey.